Hi there, my name's John, and in these slides we're going to look at national income. We're going to look at what's meant by national income. We're going to see it's measured by a statistic called GDP. We're going to look at how GDP correlates and measures against human welfare and human well-being. We'll look at what it means for the economy to grow in relation to national income. Then we'll look at some recent data from the UK and Scottish economies. First thing then is to judge how well an economy is performing. What we do is we look at the total income of everybody in the economy, or everybody in a specific nation. So Scotland, if we want to measure Scotland's national income, what we do then is we add up the income of everybody in Scotland. So you add up my income, your income, the shop worker's income, the mechanic's income, add up everybody's income all together and you get Scotland's national income. And if we add up everybody's income in the UK, then we'll get UK national income. And when we add up everybody's income together, we get a statistic called GDP. GDP then is one way of measuring a nation's income. And GDP stands for Gross Domestic Product. This gives us a measure of national income that's widely reported. In fact, it's probably the most reported measure of national income. To calculate GDP then, we can either add up everybody's income or we can add up everybody's spending. And for the whole economy, this will be the same number. Why? Because whenever one person spends money, somebody else earns money. So for me as a lecturer to get paid, I get paid by the Scottish Government. So when the Scottish Government spends money on education, some of that will be from my salary. So the government spending will be my income. If I take some of that income and I go and buy a bottle of water, then my spending of £1 and a bottle of water will be the shopkeeper's income of £1. So if you follow the money, for every pound spent, somebody else will earn £1. So for every single transaction that happens, one person is spending and another person is earning. And if we just translate that out into the whole economy, the total amount of income, by definition, will equal the total amount of spending. So two ways then to measure GDP: add up all the income or add up all the spending. We can also look at measures of GDP. So if we add up everybody's income in the UK, so this is Britain we're looking at, the UK as a whole, we can see how much everybody's income is together. So in 2019, GDP, national income in the UK, was 2 million thousand, and a million amounts of 1,000 are going to be a trillion. So everybody's income in the UK added together was about just over £2 trillion, so just £2.17 trillion or thereabouts. That was spread across 66.8 million people roughly. So that's quite a lot of people. If we get this big number and divide it by the number of people, so we get GDP divided by the number of people, then we get GDP per person or GDP per capita. And that's a very rough measure of average income. So in 2019, the income on average for each person was about £32,000, just a little bit higher. Some of that's dragged up by very high earners. So some very high earners, let's say the boss of a FTSE 100 company, they'll earn a lot more and they'll make the income higher than the average. They'll pull the average up, whereas people who are not working will pull the average down because they haven't earned income. So we can look at how GDP correlates with health. So in this graph here, every dot represents a country in the world. The size of the bubble represents the size of the population. So the two big bubbles here are India and China, and the colours represent continents. So the blue is Africa, the red ones are Asia, the green I think is the Americas, so North and South America, and the yellow is Europe. So we can see here on the vertical axis or the y-axis, we've got life expectancy from 50 to 60 to 70 to 80 years old. And we've got on the x-axis, or the horizontal axis, income or GDP per capita from $500 per person to $5,000 per person, up to $50,000 per person. And we can see quite a clear correlation there, which is we've got two corners. Down this corner here, people are poor and they die younger. So this corner is poor and sick, whereas this corner is up here is rich and healthy. So obviously it's worse to be down here in these countries here where income's low, and a consequence of being in a low income country, people on average die sooner, I'm afraid. Whereas up here in the top right hand box, we've got nations that have got high income per person, and the consequence is when you live in a rich country, you tend to get more time on the planet and your life expectancy is longer. GDP, so high GDP correlates with high levels of lifespan. Not only are you healthier if you live in a rich country, if you live in a rich country, you also tend to be happier. So again, on the horizontal axis here, we've got GDP per person from $500 to $1,000, $10,000, up to $100,000 per person. And on the vertical axis, or the y-axis, we've got life satisfaction from a 0 to 10 scale. So in essence, you ask people, on an average day, from a 0 to 10 scale, how happy are you? 0 represents, totally unhappy, whereas 10 represents the highest possible level of life satisfaction. This is data, by the way, from Our World in Data. So is the graph. So we see here quite a clear correlation, which is down in this corner, where there's low income, people tend to be, on average, pretty unhappy. This dot here represents the poorest country in the world, where average income will be less than just over $2 a day, maybe. And the average happiness is less than 3. So on a 0 to 10 scale, the average person on the average day is less than a 3 of happiness. That's pretty unhappy. Whereas by the time we get up to the rich countries here, not only are these countries richer, and as we've seen, healthier, because of that wealth and health, on average, they're also happier. So if we look here, this green bubble is the United States. So the United States, they've got very high income per person. I think the average income per person is about maybe $60,000 per person. And the average person on an average day is over a 7 in happiness, which is pretty happy. We see here the United Kingdom is this bubble here. We see we're slightly not as well off as the United States, but not too far behind. But being a little bit less well off, we're also a little bit less happy, where the average happiness is just under 7, which isn't too bad. But we see quite a clear correlation, which is as countries get richer, they also tend to be happier. One thing about GDP then, it's a way of measuring economic performance. And other things being equal, we want GDP, or national income, to be higher. When it's higher, people have got jobs, people have got well-paid jobs, and they're able to buy goods and services that give them satisfaction. So when we measure economic performance, we're measuring changes in GDP. And if GDP is rising, then that's going to be an indication that the economy is growing. And like we said, because that correlates with happiness and health, higher GDP is usually a good thing. But GDP doesn't always grow, it doesn't always rise. Sometimes GDP falls. When GDP falls by 2 quarters in a row, then the economy is going to be in a recession. And in a recession, incomes go down. And when incomes go down, unemployment usually goes up. We can see this relationship between national income and spending and employment in this graph here. So if we take the case where the economy is growing, when the economy is growing and national income is rising, because income is going up, people can spend more, consumers can go and buy more stuff at the shops. As they go and buy more stuff, firms tend to make more profits. As firms make more profits, they're willing to invest more in the future. So they're willing to maybe expand their business. They maybe set up a new premises if they're a shop, or otherwise they might take on more workers. So because they're willing to expand and invest, employment goes up. And when more people have got jobs, more people willing to spend, more spending leads to more profits, more investment, more employment, which in turn fuels more spending, more profits, more investment, more employment. It's a happy cycle. It's a virtuous cycle. It's a boom. Unfortunately, the economy doesn't only ever boom forever. Sometimes national income goes down, and in that case, the economy's in a recession. So in a recession, consumer spending falls, and because consumer spending falls, firms' profits also fall. As firms' profits fall, they've got less money to invest, so investment drops. Instead of expanding their operations, they might pull them back, so employment might actually go down. If employment is down, then unemployment is up. When unemployment goes up, people spend less, firms' profits go down, they invest less, and as they invest less, unemployment goes up again. So there's less employment, less spending, less profits, less investment, less employment, and we're in a recession or a bust. We can look then at the latest UK. We can look at over quite a long time here. This is the UK's GDP statistic. So this is UK GDP per quarter from 1955 up until 2020 quarter two. A quarter just splits the year into 3 months. So quarter one is January, February, March. Quarter two is April, May, June, and so on. So we see that there's a broad trend for things to rise, but we see it doesn't rise in a straight line. We can see there's periods where GDP goes down. There was a recession here, people call it the credit crunch, that happened from 2008. And we see this massive drop just now. So GDP fell pretty sharply in 2020. We can see it was trending upwards, then all of a sudden we fall into a cliff. So question, why did GDP fall in 2020? What caused national income to decline in 2020? And the answer, as we know, is because there was a shutdown, a great shutdown that meant lots of businesses were forced to close. And that was in response to the coronavirus, which you may have heard about, where governments around the world shut their economies. Lots of shops were forced to shut. People weren't allowed to leave home except for essential reasons. And as a consequence, lots of industries suffered massively. Airline travel was one of the worst affected, where it fell by 95%. And as a consequence of this, GDP in the UK fell in the second quarter of 2020, and it was by the biggest drop ever recorded. We can see this here as GDP is going upwards from about end of 2009, it goes up. Then suddenly out of nowhere, there's a drop. We can also see sometimes it takes quite a long time to recover from a recession. We can see the economy starts growing from 2009, but we realise to get back to where it was before it fell, see it started falling in at the start of 2008, then it finally makes up the ground it lost by the start of 2013. So it took 5 years to get back to where we were. So it took 5 years to recover then. If it takes 5 years to recover now, and let's hope it doesn't, then we won't get back to March 2020 levels until 2025. We can see how the economy's grown here. So above this line represents economic growth. That means national income's going up. Below the line represents a recession and national income falling. So there was a big recession here in 2008. But during that recession, GDP shrunk by no more than 2.1% in a quarter, which at the time seemed really bad. Then we get to 2020, and in one quarter, in quarter two, GDP goes down by just about 20%. So that's an absolutely unprecedented decline. To give you a scale of reference, in the Great Depression of the 1930s, GDP fell by about 25% over the course of 4 years. between 1929 and 1933. So to fall by 20% in 1 quarter is very severe. We see it was bouncing back though towards the end of last year, but that was before the recent lockdown measures went back into place. So when we talk about the economy recovering, we're talking about GDP coming back up, national income rising again, and people having more job opportunities. So let's hope the economy recovers in a V-shaped way, which is we've gone down quickly, then we just come back up quickly to where we were. We take off where we left off. Hopefully a vaccine gets rolled out. People can healthily go back to work and go out and spend, and the economy can get opened up again and we can return to normal. Let's hope it's not L-shaped where we go down and we just stay down for quite a long time, where maybe there's problems with the vaccine and the consequence is things can't open up for quite a while. And the downside of that is we get stuck in this situation for a prolonged time. Maybe it's more likely to be W-shaped where it goes down, comes back up, we go back into lockdown, then the vaccines get rolled out, then we come back up. So it might be a zigzag shape rather than a V shape where we go straight back to where we were. As I was looking at UK GDP, we also maybe think about Scotland's GDP, not least because this class is market operations and the Scottish economy. But Scotland's GDP followed a pretty similar pattern to UK GDP. Fell by about 20% in the second quarter. Then after the economy began to open up again, there was this bounce back. So in quarter 3, GDP rose by 16%. But given we're back into lockdown, we can anticipate that it's probably declining in the first quarter of 2021. So far anyway. So to summarise then, GDP is a measure of the income of everybody in the country. It's a measure of national income, and it's one way to measure economic well-being and how economically well off the country is. When GDP falls, the economy goes into recession, and as we enter a recession, unemployment usually goes up. And when unemployment goes up and GDP is going down, we tend to assume something's wrong with how the economy is operating. Just the way when we see this big decline, we can see the economy isn't quite up to the health that it's usually at. And I guess in this particular instance, we're relying on health experts to provide the vaccine, roll out effectively, and then hopefully this year there'll be a safe way of opening up the economy again. And as the economy safely opens up again, we can get back to our normal lives, and there'll be plenty of employment opportunities for everybody. Okay, so that's a brief introduction to GDP. So if you've managed to watch this, then hopefully you can then go and complete the activity that accompanies it.